Well, hello, friends. It is Wednesday. It is midweek. Well, today happens to be Wednesday. We don't always record on a Wednesday, but it's the middle of the week. It's between two Sundays, and Mark's here with me to talk about what's gone and what's coming. How's that for a bit more succinct?
Perfect intro to Between Two Sundays.
Well, last episode was long, and it could have been because of the intro. I don't know. Just trying to cut things short. Between Two Sundays is the podcast where we discuss the readings from the Revised Common Lectionary, and we talk about the readings that we've just come out of, and we talk about the readings that we're about to go into. We talk about how we've lived out of those and how we're going to think into those, and we do it right here in the middle because why not?
Yeah, very nice.
Better to do it in the middle than anywhere else, I suppose.
A very simple little idea is Between Two Sundays.
It is simple little, but man, there's been some profound conversations.
We've had some good ones, haven't we?
Love it. Last week was the 10th Sunday after Pentecost, proper 15 for those who are going off that. And we had readings from Isaiah, from Psalms, from Hebrews, and we continue to work through the Gospel of Luke. I got really stuck coming out of Sunday on verse 2 of Hebrews 12.
Yep.
And I know we talked about we've got this great cloud of witnesses, and verse 1 of chapter 12, which is the last two verses of the reading. And then verse 2 starts off with, we look to Jesus, but then the next couple of words, and I don't think we talked about them very much, but I got stuck on those as I contemplated the verse more. The pioneer and perfecter of our faith.
What a great place.
And I love this word, the pioneer. And I don't know why I haven't done it, but as we're talking, I'm just going to quickly throw it into Bible Hub. But the idea that Jesus is the pioneer of our faith. Now, I've read it in other versions as the author.
Yes.
But I mean, again, it's the same idea that he wrote what this looks like. And so Jesus, essentially, the writer of Hebrews is saying, is literally Jesus is the perfect model for how it is we're meant to live. If you want to know what does Christianity look like, or what should Christianity look like, it's literally Jesus. And so, look, to follow that up, archegos is the word that's used in Greek, which literally means originator, author, founder of things. So there you go, the originator. And I guess that makes perfect sense. I mean, all the places we could look and think about, well, what does it look like? It's like not seeing the forest for the trees to go, well, this is why Jesus kept saying, follow me.
Yeah.
Do you want to know how to live into the faith? Follow me, not the literal rabbinical walking along behind, although if Jesus were here, that would be right.
Sure.
But it's literally looking to Jesus and saying, well, how would Jesus do this? How would Jesus go about doing that? And not even the what would Jesus do sense, because as I used to say in my comedy shows, the T-shirts should have more letters than that, which spell out how can you know what Jesus would do when you don't know what he did. And so it's really about this heart, this spirit, because I don't know what Jesus would think about watching television, because Jesus never talked about watching television. But what is the heart and the spirit of that, of the teachings of Jesus? And so it becomes this whole, we talked about the great cloud of witnesses sort of sitting there over us. I sensed this spirit sitting there that we look to, that directs us, that, for want of a better term, without sounding like we're going off our own wisdom, common sense of, well, if Jesus, has presented themselves in this way through this, what we read about Jesus in the Gospels, then I think this is the way it would go. And I think there's some scope within that for people to do it slightly different.
One would hope so.
Which is an interest, and it would often depend on even where you live, your locality, your culture, your background.
Yep.
but we look to Jesus, and I think that's where it got really interesting for me anyway, just living out of readings on Sunday.
One of the stunning things about the New Testament, I think, is that it doesn't spell out a Christian culture. It's remarkable, and the very reason that we were discussing prayer books before we started recording, the very reason these cultures of how we choose to go about our living out our Christian faith have arisen, is that it's just not spelled out. There's no equivalent of a marriage service in the New Testament. It's something that's left perhaps dangerously open.
Well,
somewhat.
Something like that.
But it is beautifully risky. Just as you were talking there, emphasizing the pioneer element of Jesus, I was really struck by the context in which we're talking about this, which is the book of Hebrews. Distinctly Jewish. And we've got this description of Jesus as the author of our faith comes after this long list of essentially Jewish heroes. So it's not like we can take this Jesus and say he starts Christianity. He's the author of Christianity. Actually, he's the author of all that God has done.
Yes.
And there's something dangerously big about Jesus as the author of the faith, that can be described as something that Abraham did. This is not Jesus starting something in AD 30. This is a description of Jesus starting something that's been around forever. And
look, I probably should add, before we keep going, when I said the author of Christianity, that was probably a wrong term.
I wasn't thinking.
No, but I just for people who are listening, because I don't think Jesus came to start Christianity at all.
Yes.
And
yes.
What you're saying here points that out. But it also brings up what you just said there. The second thing that really pumped out, I had two things this week, and that was the fire in Luke 12. I came to bring a fire to the earth. I have a baptism to which to be baptized, in verses 49 and verse 50. Both of those acts are cleansing acts. We burn things to burn away the unvaluable and to retain the valuable. Baptism is a symbol of washing and making something clean. And so this finding this way in our faith, we'll hopefully all find ourselves going through some fire and going through some water in the hope that it will burn off or wash off the things that we need to leave behind and move forward with our eyes looking to Jesus.
Yeah. I really like that. I got stuck a little bit on the end of the gospel passage, Luke, where Jesus' criticism really everything in this passage is leading up to this. Jesus' criticism is, you don't know how to interpret the present time. Why do you not know how to interpret the present time? And of course, this is in the context of Jesus being right in front of people and people completely misunderstanding that. But there was something of me that was asking, it seems very important that we're readers not just of Scripture, but also of our generation and of the time, the cultural context we find ourselves in. So we're back to culture, which is where we ended up talking before. It seems to me that Christianity really does have to find expression within our time, and maybe that's something that Hebrews list is sort of pointing to, that all these heroes of the Jewish faith that demonstrated faith were all from different eras. They actually lived in very different contexts and responded very differently to what they knew about God. There's something alarmingly concrete about the description of faith in this Hebrews passage.
Mm.
The faith is manifest in the things they do, not just in the things they know. And I wonder if that's part of the challenge to us. What does it look like to be so grounded in our time that we live out what God is asking us to do, and we do the faith rather than we sit contentedly back and say we've got all the answers.
Yeah.
This very profound call to do, which I would suggest is perhaps the essence of what divides. Often we think of, the divisions in the church are around doctrine, but I would suggest that it's actually the way we go about living that doctrine. You and I were discussing, and this is happening all over the world at the moment. A couple of denominations we're close to that are splitting at the moment, and it's the doing, it's the action that really does throw the cat among the pigeons, so to speak. And I'm not saying I agree with all the action, of course, but I am suggesting that it's one thing for us to talk and talk and talk and talk, but when one side takes action and does what they believe, be that where I stand or not, that really is the point of the line in the sand. This is where I stand.
Yeah.
And that is often very divisive within families, within cultures, within Christian communities. So there's I left this thinking, what is there to say about these people that have Jesus right in front of them and can't see it? And is there something kind of self-righteous about me wanting to suggest that that's problematic when I actually live in a time where I'm not sure I always read exactly what's happening well, in light of my faith and in light of practice.
Yeah.
So there was something in me challenged to be alert to my time, and to desire to be faithful within that, as a result of reading that gospel reading.
Awesome. If you missed last week's episode and have a spare few hours up your hand, go back and have. Actually, no, it wasn't that long, but go back and have a listen. Not quite.
It was a new record, wasn't it?
It was a new record. Let's not go there.
No.
This coming Sunday now is the 11th Sunday after Pentecost, proper 16. And
Yes.
Our readings for this week from the Revised Common Lectionary are Jeremiah chapter 1, verses 4 to 10, Psalm 71, verses 1 to 6, Hebrews 12, verses 18 to 29, and the Gospel is Luke 13, verses 10 to 17. You'll find that list of readings we get our printouts from the Vanderbilt library. If you put Vanderbilt lectionary into the search engine, it'll come up, along with, as we keep saying, beautiful images, which you can use in your PowerPoints for Sundays and things that will help stimulate those things there. So, and by the way, all the readings are listed in the show notes down below if you're watching on YouTube, and some of them have links if you're really lucky, but if not, just Google it and obviously it'll come up. Are we just going to rock through from the start?
Yeah,
Is there a particular way you want to go?
Not particularly.
Okay.
I didn't think they all automatically related to one another, but maybe we can see some themes.
Sure. Jeremiah 1, the infamous Jeremiah 1.
Yes.
Sometimes contentious Jeremiah 1, used for all sorts of things.
Yeah.
To prove and hold all sorts of ideas, doctrines. I, as normal for me, got sucked into the words.
Yes.
In verse 5, formed, new, consecrated, and appointed.
Very nice.
And I did my normal thing and pulled out my Hebrew, and there's some beautiful things in these words. That word formed is yotzar, which means the image of the potter, which I think's a beautiful idea to understand, or the image of the carver. So you have this God who is saying to Jeremiah, I've literally formed you, I've carved you, which is interesting because there's throwbacks there to the idea that people would carve or shape or form their gods and place them in temples.
Yes.
And yet here is the God who's forming and shaping the creation and placing them in particular places. The word "knew," where it says "I knew you," is yodah, which doesn't just mean to know, but also means to find or discover or discern. And I love the idea that God is saying, I made you and I found you.
Yeah.
It's almost like that image of I can't remember, I think it might have been one of the famous sculptors who sculpted the thing, and they said, how did you turn that into a horse? He said, no, it wasn't that. The horse was in there the whole time. I just kept chipping away at the rock or the wood until the horse came out.
Yeah.
It just really
wasn't the horse.
Yeah, that's right. The horse was already there. So this idea of discovering or discerning who we are. Then there's this word consecrate. I consecrated you, kodesh, which does mean to set apart, to show something as sacred.
Yeah.
And then I appointed you, which is northan, which is to give. So I've given you, I've put you, I've set you. So you have this really interesting, I guess, progression of this God who shapes, discovers the shaping, and then sets it down and puts it in a particular place.
Yeah.
And I'm just going, wow.
Mark, you're making me want to play with the broader context here, and indeed some stuff of this is within this passage already. Jeremiah is terrified of this call. He is insisting that he's not ready. This language of I'm only a boy, pick someone else, essentially. How many people in ministry actually go through this period of a deep fear that I'm not good enough, that God hasn't made me, like the other people I've witnessed in ministry who are, maybe much more dynamic, maybe much more upfront. This is kind of important for Jeremiah in particular. He's known as the weeping prophet, of course. So this is the guy who almost probably goes through seasons of significant depression as he goes about his ministry. So here he is anything, there's probably a whole lot of aspects to him, probably for his whole life, where he felt quite inadequate for this call. And yet you've brought out this sort of thread of call language through this text. And he's the kind of person probably our culture wouldn't call. Probably our culture would look at him and say, you're not tough enough, or you're not, you haven't got the robustness that's needed for this upfront clashing kind of ministry. And yet he is a prophet to kings. He's a prophet to his nation. Interestingly enough, this fear that he won't have words links in beautifully with the fact that he's wonderfully symbolic. He does a lot of things throughout Jeremiah rather than just speak, and he sees in metaphors.
Mm.
So there's something very quite artistic about Jeremiah, which probably comes out of this sort of
Emotional, yeah.
melancholy, emotional, connected
Intelligence.
That's part of him. So I think there's a way you can take this passage quite literally and play with it as to how Jeremiah's life plays out, and read all of Jeremiah through this idea that he feels inadequate, and yet God chooses him and uses him through his unique gifting, which obviously is just beautiful. That one who seems so fragile can be used so profoundly by God, even though he can't see it himself. It is really quite spectacular and should be quite encouraging. When I was a chaplain at a school, I used to say to myself continually, and I would actually act on this. So I would get other people up to speak at chapel. I would get young people up, some of the students. I would get other teachers up. I would get the head of, the principal of the school. I would get multiple voices. I would get males and females. I would invite these people to come to chapel and contribute. And it was all coming out of a philosophy that, as the chaplain, even as the head of the team of chaplains, there was no way in the world that in a school of 1,600, everyone was going to connect with me. I came as myself. I read scripture from a certain point of view. I celebrated parts of scripture that I understood at the time more than other parts. And it seemed to me to be particularly arrogant to think that one person could take that role of linking with everyone else. We need in ministry the spectrum of personalities. There were unquestionably students there that didn't connect with me as quickly as they connected with others. And that's not me being falsely modest or anything. That's just me being human. That's me being me. There's no way in the world I was going to connect with the spectrum of personalities across an entire school. And so it seemed to me to be really vital to put a spectrum of people approaching the gospel in front of the kids. And that actually released me not to feel like I had to be everything to everyone, and released me to celebrate the capacity of others that I didn't have, even within ministry, even within teaching scripture, which I would have sort of enjoyed significantly while I was there. It seems to me that particularly Jeremiah, since he's probably the type of person our culture wouldn't pick as the great prophet of his time, yet God did, and he brings something unique to the conversation, approaches God in a unique way, hears God in a unique way, and that's valuable, even though it's not maybe trendy or connects with even with most. He doesn't have to connect with most. He has to be faithful to, one, who God's made him, and two, what God speaks into his heart.
Yeah. And let's be very real. I know we talked about this in the context of people who are called to ministry, but I think this is true of anybody who feels a sense of vocation and call to anything. That it could be business, it could be flying planes, it could be artistic endeavors. Could be that you have this sense of vocation to it, that call to step out and follow that path. Sometimes, a lot of the time, there's this sense of trepidation about that. That because it's not so much the task, it's the sense of weightiness behind it, because you feel this sense of call and vocation that goes with that. There are people here in this school where I am who I'm sure became teachers because they have these skills and gifts and things, and they like to be in front of kids and like to share their knowledge, and that's great. In a school like ours, though, which in some ways does demand a little bit more, perhaps from teachers, that's not true. It doesn't demand. Maybe it just happens because of the sorts of people that get attracted here. But this sense of vocation is why people invest. They don't just come here to teach. They come here to invest. Not to say that teachers, please don't hear me wrong, teachers, I really do appreciate what you do, having worked in schools most of my life. But certainly my experience here is that there's a lot of people seem to carry a sense of vocation about their teaching vocation. And I would say that for a lot of them, there was a bit of trepidation about that. No one stands in front of 25 to 30 young people without trembling in their boots a few times, especially the first time. And you're going, what am I doing here? And how can I do this? I don't know how to speak. I'm just a insert thing here. And yet that sense of vocation and call, that forming and shaping and discerning. I love the idea that God works it out as God goes along, kind of like we do. God starts the forming and then goes, I think I know what this is going to be. I think I know what this is for. So there's beautiful, powerful beginnings.
I'm not sure, Mark, if I've told this story on between two Sundays before, but I particularly relate to Jeremiah in this. I remember when I was 19 years old, I felt very called to go to Bible college, and so I did. But I remember making a deal with God. I'll go and do ministry, but you'll have to put me into a ministry where I don't have to speak in front of other people. That's how terrified I was of public speaking. I hated it. It was the worst. My teachers at school cannot believe I have gone on and made a career out of this. And I literally have never had a job where I wasn't public speaking. So this sense of call, where God knows us better than we know ourselves. God knows our capacity better than we know our own capacity, and that comes right through in this passage of Jeremiah. And incidentally, the psalm insists that this is not just Jeremiah's story.
Yes.
Very much emphasizes the same thing, but says it in a much broader and more general way. So it's not linked with one particular person or one particular prophet. But that language of knowing me from birth and taking me from my mother's womb is here again. All that language of youth is here again in the psalm as well.
I really loved verse 3 of the psalm. I really dug down deep there. Be to me a rock of refuge and a strong fortress. And I never thought about this before, but basically a fortress is something that's over our heads and a rock is something that's under our feet. And so there's this complete hedge that the psalmist is talking about here. And refuge and fortress. We often think of fortresses as places of putting ourselves in readiness for battle and defense. But we forget that during these times when the Psalms were written, Israel had these places where people could run to. Basically, they were the cities of protection. So, you did something wrong. It's almost like there was this not get out of jail free card, but you could escape being treated harshly for what you'd done. You still have to go through the processes, but you can run to these cities of refuge. And so the idea that, a fortress isn't just a place for, fortifying yourself against an enemy, but there's also this sense of a place where behind the walls you are protected. So there's this complete protection that comes beneath and above us. And so the idea again that, in walking this path into the call of vocation into which we feel compelled to follow. And again, just as another aside, this may not be a job. This may be something that you do on the side as a hobby, but it becomes more than that because you realize this is a part of your service to the world. And so this idea that we are able to find refuge in God, and I think about the context of Jeremiah and the psalm being here. Jeremiah is concerned about the criticism. He's concerned about the people who would say basically too young, too fresh, not from the right place. Who are you to do this? And the psalmist basically says that God can be to us a place where we will find that complete protection. And the verse straight after it, rescue me, O God, from the hand of the wicked, from the grasp of the unjust and the cruel. So this idea that if we're surrounded in this hedge by this God who has called us, then we needn't be afraid of the criticisms. And it's taken me a heck of a long time. I'm 49 years of age. And, I would have said that it's not until I was in the start of my 40s that I really started to let go of that concern that comes from criticism. I'm happy to take criticism and I'm happy to look at it. But if it was just harsh and nasty, as the psalmist seemed indicating here, wicked and cruel and unjust criticism, then I quite frankly am very willing to say, I don't care what you think. I mean, hear me right, I'll consider it. And if I think I need to make changes, I'll make the changes and I'll take your criticism. But if not, if I look at it and I go, I'm not going to be worried by it. I'm not going to be worried by people who will say, who are you to speak? If I've paid my dues and I feel that I need to be a voice here, I'll be a voice. But that's hard in this world, in this day and age. And obviously it was hard in Jeremiah's time as well. But the psalmist reminds us we are rescued from those things. And we can find in God a place to, I think there's something about this psalm that talks about us truly being ourselves. Being true to who we are, our call, our response to God, the way we think God's calling us to be. No one else can judge that. No one else can judge how I think God has spoken to me about this. I can be wrong. But if I'm wrong, I'm certainly going to find out about it. If I'm honest with myself, and I'd like to think I've come to a point in life where I can be. So this psalm is just beautiful. It provides a place where I can be me, and I can be me exactly how I was born to be. Upon you I've leaned from my birth. It was you who took me from my mother's womb. My praise is continually of you. There's this sense of we're born to be who we were born to be. Let's be that person. And life pushes us along quite a bit to follow the path of being like someone else wants us to be, like our parents or a teacher or the group of friends around us or a particular way, and we think we have to be like that in order to be accepted. This is a psalm that you can meditate on and come back to a place of saying, well, no, who is the authentic Mark? Who is the authentic you? And to be that person. And that's what Jeremiah is being called to here. He's being called to his authenticity that is ingrained in him from the image of the potter and from the discerning of the potter or the creator, that this is where I think this person's going to fit.
Yeah, nice. I've always found fear of criticism to be a much bigger challenge than criticism. Much bigger, much bigger.
Yeah.
The fear that people will, come up with holes and want to argue back or defend ground. I think it's been a much bigger influence in causing me to, for many years to hold back much more than I do now. I really think that the foundation of that was fear. It was never that everyone was criticizing me. It was much more the perception that it might happen, and where it has happened, where I have been criticized, I've got to say I've handled it much better than in my imagination I have. In my imagination, I'd just cave and wouldn't have any comeback, and it would just be exposed, and this would be a disaster. But actually, in reality, it's never been like that. It's always been a pretty sensible conversation, really, that I've grown through, and that I've been able to help others grow through as well. So I wonder if this is going on in Jeremiah's life a little bit as well. Is he scared of something that actually, when it comes to the reality, he'll handle pretty well?
Yeah. And Hebrews starts to touch in on this towards the end of the reading.
Yeah.
It kicks off talking about what this mountain is and what this mountain isn't that we're being called to. But down, you get to around verse 27, where the writer says, verse 26, probably for context. At that time, God's voice shook the earth, but now God has promised, yet once more I will shake not only the earth, but also the heaven. This phrase, yet once more, indicates the removal of what is shaken, that is, created things, so that what cannot be shaken may remain. This is another refining fire. This shaking is another refining. And like Jeremiah, our deeper self or identity, the true self or identity, is what remains after the shaking. In verse 28, it goes on to say, therefore, since we've received a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us give thanks, by which we offer to God an acceptable worship with reverence and awe, for indeed our God is a consuming fire. There's that refining again. Yeah. There's that burning off of the dross and the chaff and the wood and the hay and the stubble and the other baggage and crap we carry around with ourselves, so we can get back to the essence of what is true about our image and whose image we're made in, about the call and vocation that we have on our lives. And so what we see here at the end of this passage is that coming into the truth of who we are and the truth of what it is that we are called to, this kingdom that we live in, as our lives go through this shaking and through this fire. The writer's very clear. This kingdom, God's kingdom, cannot be shaken. So if we shouldn't fear the fact that the shakings happen, that the fire comes through, because the stuff that gets shaken out and burnt off isn't a part of that thing that we're meant to be connected to. Certainly there could be a time of grieving for that thing that we lose through that, because we kind of liked it, or it was fun, or whatever it happens to be. Any loss will receive some grieving with it. But this is about what is important, what is true, what is right, what is just. That's what's going to be left behind. This, we've been talking about Jeremiah, this person that Jeremiah is meant to be. this person that Jeremiah should be without fear of what's coming around them as they go out and start to proclaim things as the prophet. Likewise, we too go through this refining, this shaking, this fire, this baptism, as we we're talking about with last week's psalm, so that we can be truly everything that we were called to be. And it's not a once-off affair. This happens time after time after time as we grow and develop. And it's almost like we come through, and just like with some things, you put them through the fire and then shake the, then you put them through the fire again. It's the same, this refining, but what's left is the core essence of what it is that we're meant to be, of what it is that's important, of what it is that is right and true and just, remembering that the same happens to all that's around us. So what's left around us? This kingdom that cannot be shaken. This is the way of being and doing in the world that God has called us to be and to do. And we don't need the other stuff in order to find fulfillment and joy and to live life and life to the full, as Jesus put it in John 10:10. So I love this connection that I've sort of seen here, because it's one that tells us not just of the fear of stepping in, or the trepidation, maybe a better word, of stepping in, and the safety that's there once we step in, but there's this ongoing shaping, forming. It's not just the forming that happens at the start, as we saw in Jeremiah. There's a continual shaping and forming that goes on. It's almost like the first draft gets put out there, and then comes the second, the third, the fourth draft, and it'll be a continual drafting until perfection comes at some point. Probably not in this way that we're living now, but at some point.
I was linking in with all that stuff you're saying there. I got to the end of this passage and thought to myself, all this, mountain and darkness and shaking, and this is very consistent throughout this passage. And yet there's, it seems to me that the first half is, all these very, very strong resonances of Moses going up the mountain and getting the 10 Commandments.
Yep.
And bearing in mind again that Hebrews is very Jewish and seems to be kind of written, the gospel written to the Jews, so to speak. I found myself thinking, what are the resonances that go on between this, between this description of Christ as one who as one who is being described as one shaking like this, one who's what are the resonances between Christ and Moses here for the Jewish mindset? And I don't know that I have the answers, except this sense of the 10 Commandments forming Israel, and then the staggering blessing that was. There's a parallelism going on between that event and Christ as this one who shakes us to the core, and reforms us. This incredible hope that must be being tapped into as they talk about the moment Moses goes up Mount Sinai and gets these 10 Commandments, that they still, celebrate and live out, and rightly so, of course. I just found myself wondering what goes on in the Jewish mind when these things are paralleled. And I'm sure there's much more going on here than I realize.
Yeah, I wonder, I'm just throwing a thought out that popped into my mind as you were talking there, that first part describing Sinai and the Sinai event, out of which the commandments came and formed and shaped the nation. Maybe the parallel is that we've come to a different mountain, but there's still a forming and a shaping that comes from it. We're not.
Yes.
The Christ event isn't a get out of jail free card. There is still a shaping, there's still a forming, there's still a Sinai to stand beneath, and there's still a desert to walk through.
Yeah.
It's
There's
a different
something
one.
in me that desperately wants to listen to a Jew read this.
Yeah.
There's something in me that is quite convinced there's much more going on here than I can see.
Yeah.
And I'm not suggesting that, you know, we can't read it or we're blind to it entirely, but I this is one of those passages, and Hebrews does this to me a lot, that made me think, gee, I wonder what's really going on.
Which brings us to the gospel.
What a simply beautiful story. This woman comes, the description of her is bent over, and Christ touching, Jesus touching her, and this healing that seems to get Jesus in a whole lot of trouble straight away. It really does seem to me to be provoked by her suffering, not Jesus' desire to cause trouble. It's one of these stories that has elements that lead us to see compassion here as the big motive. And I think that's probably where the shame comes from by the end. These opponents put to shame. I don't know that it's so much that Jesus is clever with words or gives a clever answer. I think it's that Jesus just has compassion, and where you don't, you look like you're out of step.
How can you not be shamed when it's pointed out to you quite fairly and gently, I think? Yeah. I mean, I know we often read Jesus' words, and I think this is worth saying here. When you read Jesus' words, think about the tone you're putting on it in your head.
Oh, yes.
And I think I found it a really handy thing to actually read it in various tones. Simply to get my head around stuff. But so I think this is actually quite a gentle comment. But boy, it's got some weight, because literally he is saying to these people, you've got more compassion on a donkey,
yes,
than you've got on this woman.
Yes.
Or you would show more compassion to a donkey than you would for this woman. You would do for a donkey more than you'd be willing to do for this woman.
Yeah. Which really is, that is promoting shame, isn't it?
Absolutely.
That's going to have its effect when there's no argument to come back to.
Yeah.
To come back with. Yeah. I've been I run a book club at my church, and most months we will pick a book, and on the first Monday of the month we'll get together and discuss it, and we'll all have read it. We just through circumstance and people taking holidays and stuff like that, we've ended up with about a 6 to 8 week gap between when we met just a few days ago and when we'll meet again. And we sort of said, what will we do with the big gap? Is this a bit of an opportunity for us to read or listen to, as many of us are wanting to do? So we will. So a number of us in that club will listen to a book rather than read it on Audible. And we said to ourselves, so at the moment, we are listening to the New Testament. So that's the book we've set aside.
Wow. Okay.
And I tell you what, tone is ridiculously powerful. So I'm listening to it by I'm not going to be able to pronounce his name, and he's very popular. I'm a bit embarrassed by that. David Suchet,
right,
who played Poirot in that TV show, but he reads it very gently. I'm quite convinced, I may be wrong here, I'm quite convinced he's the same guy that reads Wind in the Willows in one of the in one of the wonderful depictions of that story. Okay. I may be wrong there, but I always get that impression as I listen to him. But there are moments, I'm only partway through the Gospel of Matthew, so I'm not claiming to have listened to the whole New Testament yet. But there are moments where you are very tempted to read anger into Jesus' words, where he reads them very, very gently and very graciously, and it is tremendously powerful. Well worth having a listen to, just to realise how much we bring tone to certain words, to certain phrases, when we hear Jesus answering his enemies. How much anger do we insert into that may not actually be there?
Yeah.
One of the other guys in the group is actually listening to Johnny Cash's reading of the New Testament. So,
oh wow!
So there's a few different voices there that are possibilities, and I reckon listening to it is a really good way of realizing the tone that we put on it, even as we read silently.
Yes. Yes, and it matters.
This is one of those passages where we can read a fairly angry tone into what is actually, as soon as we think this brings shame, one of the things we're tempted to say is Jesus is trying to put shame on them. But maybe this can be read very gently. This little parable of the donkey and untying it can be read very gently, with a deep desire for Jesus to communicate with those who are opposing what he's done for this woman, rather than a desire to, smash them and win. I think often there are ways of reading, and we do bring tone into it at this point, that can remind us that Jesus is reaching out lovingly and graciously to everyone. And I think this pointing out of, hang on, you would do this for a donkey, but you're concerned that I've done this for a person. I think there is a way of imagining it that is actually desiring to be persuasive rather than to conquer. And yes. I love that kind of approach. And I do find myself, as I read the Gospels especially, wanting to ask what tone Jesus is speaking, or what tone I'm inflicting on the text.
Yes, absolutely. And it's a relatively straightforward story. But it says so much about what we think's okay and what we don't think's okay, and how we'll always make a way to justify that. So obviously the leaders of the synagogue, or the leader of the synagogue, doesn't think that, looking after his donkey is in the same category as helping a woman when it comes to Sabbath tasks and duties. And it's so easy for us to say, well, God thinks this is more, and this is really what it comes down to. This is about God thinking that this is more important than something else.
Sorry, I'm just trying to lighten the room a little bit.
No, that's okay. And that's really
see myself disappearing.
But that's what's being said here. These people are literally saying, God wants us to look after our donkeys.
Yeah.
But God doesn't want us to look after this woman in the same way.
Yes. Yes.
And it's interesting that he uses the analogy of walking the ox or the donkey to water.
Mm.
I think that there's something very poignant about that. He uses the analogy of it's okay for you to lead the animal to water on the Sabbath.
Yeah.
Is that an analogy for what's happened here to this woman, that she has been led to water? That she has had her thirst quenched. And when you think about it, crippled for 18 years, bent over, quite unable, straight up, no doubt living with an ailment for that long, one of the things, what would you wish for most, my love? She would say, to get rid of this horrible disease. And so Jesus leads her to water on the Sabbath. And yet these people are hypocritical enough to say that, no, that's not appropriate. How often do I, or have I, tried to lift things up as being, this is okay, but this is not? I mean, who am I to say that? It certainly makes me wonder and be more aware of those moments when I might be trying to do this. I'm stuck right now. It just popped in my head about that water thing. Man, that's pretty cool. This quenching of thirst.
Water is of course so essential, isn't it? You give a donkey water on the Sabbath, because if you don't,
you could die without it.
It's dead. This is essential stuff. It's not, it's not over caring for this donkey or anything like this. This is just basics.
Oh, on the Sabbath.
Yes.
You give a donkey water on the Sabbath. The Sabbath is for water to the people of God. That's what it's for.
Yes.
The Sabbath is the day of worship, of celebration, of coming together, of sitting and being restored and being boom. It's about the wholeness of that shalom, that true wholeness that is being denied to this woman, and that's what the Sabbath is for.
And they won't even deny that to a donkey. It's basic shalom. It's basic shalom to have a drink of water every day for a donkey. One would think, not that I'm an expert on donkeys or anything, but this is a basic understanding of the way the world works.
And these are the very people, these are the pastors. He's literally speaking to the pastors who should know that this is what Sabbath is for. That Sabbath is for restoring and bringing wholeness. And oh man,
I love the crowd's response to this too. That they're just they are, in the language we've just used, they're entering into Sabbath perfectly. Yes. They are, rejoicing at all the wonderful things that he was doing. Is this beautiful way of summing this story up. Unfortunately, it's the religious ones that are hung up on this and can't celebrate the wonderful things. Can't celebrate the Sabbath of Jesus being there, and demonstrating the very essence of Sabbath. It's just so sad, and really does leaves me saying all the time, I've got to be a follower of Jesus rather than a follower of religion. I can't be a follower of the rules while I'm following this Jesus who's set me free from the law. I've got to learn to be following Jesus rather than trying to keep in step with a community that has all its boundaries and all of that kind of thing. If I'm to be faithful to this, I'm called way beyond just doing the religious thing.
Mm.
And it puts us in, I think it puts all of us in tension with the institutionalization of the church. We have to learn to stand with Jesus rather than with the institution. We have to learn to defend the ground of following Jesus rather than defend the ground of religious institutionalism. And that is a very difficult path to walk. Though I would suggest the prophets like Jeremiah walked wonderfully.
Yes.
And certainly the Apostle Paul walked a very, very difficult line that put him on the outside of his religious traditions as he learnt to follow Jesus. And I do mean learnt. I don't think he sort of, unlike us, just did it perfectly from the get-go. I think he was a fellow traveller with us.
Mm. And your comment there brings out a really important point too. You can read this as if you were the woman. You can read this and put yourself in the place of the crowd. And by the way, it was the entire crowd that was rejoicing.
Yes.
And let's remember that's what it says here. And let's remember the context. This is Jesus teaching in one of the synagogues.
Yeah.
So he's up front teaching. He calls the woman over, says, "Be free," lays a hand on her. Then the leader gets indignant and speaks out. And Jesus speaks back. The entire crowd that's sitting there in this synagogue, entire crowd was rejoicing at all the wonderful things that he was doing. Yeah. So we could see ourselves as the woman and we could see ourselves as the crowd, but I suspect that for most of us, we're likely to be in the place of the leader of the synagogue.
Yeah.
And I think that's worth holding in our hearts.
Yeah. So homework for our listeners is to read this passage through 3 times.
Well, I was just going to say,
putting ourselves in the place of those 3 characters.
I've just put here imaginative contemplation.
Yes, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
In fact, Lectio. I'll make a Lectio audio and put it up on Insight Timer and not a Lectio, a contemplative imagination audio.
That's an interesting observation around reading scripture that we've brought in there, since we had, I said a fair bit about tone before. Now we're actually asking the question about, what angle, where do we see ourselves? And you can very legitimately, especially as you read the Gospels, see yourself as the crowd, see yourself in the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the religious people who are defending ground, see ourselves in the disciples. And less often, I would suggest, people actually see themselves in the place of Jesus. There's probably an inherent reluctance to do that. And maybe on some level that's good, but maybe there's another level on which if we're following Jesus, maybe there's something worthwhile about reading a passage like this one and saying, can I see myself in Jesus? Where do I see myself in the actions and words of Jesus here?
The 11th Sunday after Pentecost.
Done.
Another between 2 Sundays. Again, our readings today were from Jeremiah 1 verses 4 to 10, Psalm 71 verses 1 to 6, Hebrews 12 verses 18 to 29, and Luke 13 verses 10 to 17. Our prayer is that maybe something we've said stimulated some thinking, but of course we would love to hear from you as well. Where have these readings taken you? Where do they take you as you contemplate them approaching Sunday or even after Sunday? Please get in touch with us. You can touch base with us through the comments at both Mark's blog, which is barefootfollower.life, through my Instagram posts at monkindocs, and via email at between2sundays@gmail.com. That's with a number 2. Or if you go to our link tree, which you'll find both in the notes for the podcast or here on YouTube, you'll be able to see all the things that we do in different places all over the web. And get in touch with us in those things. Send us direct messages, send us an email, put us something in the comments, and share with us about where these readings have taken you, because we'd like to go on the adventure with you as well. There's so much in this stuff that, man, we don't see it all.
A confusing array of possibilities to get in touch with us.
Yes, just I guess there's kind of no excuses not to if you're trying.
Well, yeah, that's true. It's got to be a way.
More difficult not to, or something like that. So until next week, when we'll discuss these readings again and how we've lived them out over the past week, and into the ones that are coming for the 12th Sunday after Pentecost. Until then, Mark G saying goodbye.
Thank you. Good to see you all.
Thank you, Mark. And we'll see you next week.
All right.
Bye for now.
See ya.